I'm going to talk about all those Milosevic videos that I posted amid the ruins, and Fall Talk both asked me, so I'm going to offer my comments. Being an American, we're outside today, of course. Being an American, you don't really know anything about the Balkans. You don't know anything about the ethnic groups, the history, the culture, the religions. You don't know anything about that. So when your president decides to bomb that place, you don't know why they're doing it. You just have to go off of the media, which gives you kind of a confused story about a bad man who hates people who aren't like himself and wants to kill everybody to achieve some sort of political goals. That's the story that the West gives about Milosevic, and that's the story that they presented in his trial. What seems to have really happened is that during and after the fall of communism in the Soviet Union, in Russia, the Western governments, and which is basically synonymous with the Western political elites and Western corporations, Western capital, they decided that they wanted to gobble up Yugoslavia's economy. And the way that they did that was by giving them loans, having them decrease the size of their public sector, and basically completely reorder their society. And when that kind of stuff happens, you create new markets, because the way that people used to live goes away. They can't get the things that they used to in the way that they used to, so now they have to get it from somewhere else. And some gigantic corporation from the West can come in, buy up things for cheap during crisis times, and have a new market to sell to. So, I'm sure they were making shoes, right, in Yugoslavia. They had their own domestic shoe production, and Nike's going to come in and start selling their Nikes that they're making in Thailand or China or something like that. And they're doing it with Wall Street capital, which is the result of the printing press in the United States with the Federal Reserve just creating money out of thin air so that these countries can go over to Yugoslavia and buy everything up and ruin any kind of local domestic culture. Anyway, that's the basic form that I see the conflict starting out as. The result was that this large multi-ethnic republic called the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, it fragmented into the three different groups: the Orthodox Serbs, the Catholic Croats, and then all of the Muslims as a third group. The Serbs dominated the government, I think, but they were not the exclusively ethnic holders of power. However, there's 2 Serbs for every Croat in the area, all taken together. So the Croats knew that if they didn't have socialism or communism as an ideology to bind them together, then Serbian nationalism could end up running the entire country. So, of course, some of the Croat leaders, Croat nationalists, said we need to break off and form our own country so that we can have self-determination. And so that's what they did. And then they took shelter under NATO by saying, we'll be your ally in the Balkans. Serbia, the Serbian population is non-contiguous. There's one big chunk of it in modern-day Serbia, and then there was another discontiguous part in territory to the west that today we call the Republic of Srpska. And it seems like the Serbian nationalist group specifically wanted to link up these 2 groups, or at least provide, at the minimum, provide protection to the exclave. The Muslims, I guess, just wanted to establish a Muslim state and continue to live, under that or whatever. So what inevitably happened was that the 3 groups were fighting over territory, because individual villages might be only one ethnic group, but they would be next to another village, so that the ethnic groups weren't contiguous in any respect, and many regions contained mixtures of all 3 different ethnic groups living fairly close to each other. So when these 3 new states are forming, or three ethnic blocks are forming, they're fighting over territory. And you can be pretty sure that some innocent people were killed on all sides, that soldiers and guerrilla groups and militias use these times to settle old scores and blood feuds and just all that kind of stuff. So what happened in the trial against Milosevic was that they said that Milosevic was carrying out genocide and ethnic cleansing through his proxies outside of Serbia, in these other areas that had Serbs in them. So their evidence was that they found dead bodies, and they had anonymous testimonies saying that Serbs had killed these people, that Serbs were the cause of these dead bodies, that the Serbs produced them with guns and knives and fire and all that kind of stuff. And Milosevic, in his testimony and his arguments and statements, blew holes through all of this, saying you've got some anonymous statements and you've got some dead bodies and you have absolutely no proof that I am linked to the people who did this, or that the people who did this were even Serbs. And then as counter evidence, he produced statements and testimony and videos and stuff from the United Nations peacekeepers who were there at the time, saying that either Muslims did it, or that it wasn't the way it was told, or that there was just confusion and no way to know for sure. So Milosevic destroyed, I think, their attempt to establish what we would say is like a reasonable doubt. He definitely established reasonable doubt for himself that he was responsible for any of this stuff. But he was doing what every nationalist and every government should be doing, which is to try to protect its people. And that's really what he's guilty of, because the West hates ethno-states, hates nationalists, hates any attempt of people to look out for their own interests outside of NATO's purview or protection or authority. What else did I have to say? The testimony of the woman from Helsinki Watch is extremely interesting, and I'm going to probably rip that out of there and post it as a separate clip and maybe do a mashup on it, because if you take her arguments there and apply it to some other stuff from the 20th century, things get really dodgy really fast. And of course, Helsinki Watch is, I think, a branch of Human Rights Watch. It's related to Amnesty International, and all of those are globalist CIA deep state ops. So when you see The Hague, the criminal court, the ICTY, whatever it's called, and NATO, and the so-called human rights organizations all cooperating to go after Milosevic, you know that we're dealing with nothing but a public relations op, basically. They're just trying to scare people and say, don't you ever do this again. And what they're also doing is trying to pin all of the genocide and all of the excesses and the murders on one man and one group. They want to pin it all on Milosevic and make him a Hitler. They want to pin it all on the Serbs and make them, like Nazis. And that's basically the whole thing. Particularly like bombings, for instance, like people killed by NATO bombings. They want to blame that kind of stuff on the Serbs too. And it's really difficult for me because I have feeling for both the Serbs and the Croats. And all the Balkan peoples. They really got one of the rawest deals of the 20th century, and they had to suffer a lot more than they should have, but it's made them strong. And if I had to come down on one side or the other, I have to choose the Serbian side, because the Croats, they went with NATO, and that's a problem. Just like it's a problem for me to be an American and be living in the country that's causing a lot of these troubles. So that's my opinion on the issue. Thank y'all for your time.